The year is 1858. Accounts have arrived of the death of Gizo, the monster king of the Dahomey, who for 25 years ravaged the interior to supply the Spanish and Portuguese slave dealers in the Bight of Benin. All the slave dealers of Whydah attended his funeral obsequies and contributed 800 slaves to be sacrificed to his memory. The new king proclaimed his policy to be that of his father, and is said to have set out with a large army on a slave hunting expedition. The growing prosperity of this part of the coast is seriously endangered by recent events. The production of palm oil has much decreased. King Kosoko is making preparations to attack his former capital, Legals, and at this critical juncture, the Commodore is ordered by the Admiralty to withdraw the gunboat, which has for some time protected the place and its rising commerce. The tradition of human slaughter, the grand custom, was one held in the highest esteem by King Gizo. It showed his great power over the life and death of others. Hundreds would be massacred at a time as tribute to some arbitrary event named by the king. When King Gizo, the great slave king of the Dahomey, died in 1858, some estimates from 800 to 2,000 slaves were massacred in his memory. In 1860, 2 years after the death of King Gizo, his son, King Badung, the new king of Dahomey, decided that in honor of his father's memory, a grand custom must be made. A grand custom was the ceremonial sacrifice of hundreds of slaves. A pit was dug in order to collect enough blood to float a canoe. Some 2,000 persons were to be sacrificed. They were to be beheaded and thrown into the pit to bleed out. Gizo's Amazon female army did all of the beheading for the great massacres as well. It had been proposed to facilitate Gizo's admission into the other world by the slaughter of 2,000 Africans, but whether from the difficulty of procuring the number or from the greatly increased value to the Spaniards, the massacre was happily limited to 800. Quote from Rev. C.S. Hasels, a colonial chaplain of present-day Benin. Dahomey, His Majesty Badahong, King of Dahomey, is about to make the grand custom in honor of the late King Gizo. Determined to surpass all former monarchs in the magnitude of the ceremonies to be performed to this occasion, Badahong has made the most extensive preparations for the celebration of the grand custom. A great pit has been dug which is to contain human blood enough to float a canoe. 2,000 persons will be sacrificed on this occasion. The expedition to Abeokuta is postponed, but the king has sent his army to make some excursions at the expense of some weaker tribes and has succeeded in the capturing many unfortunate creatures. The young people among these prisoners will be sold into slavery, and the old persons will be killed at the great custom. Would to God this might meet the eyes of some of the great philanthropic Englishmen who have some feeling for Africa. Tradition amongst the Fon in Western Africa and among other ethnic groups often had ceremonies in family lineages where all members of the family would gather for a feast, provide gifts to the eldest member of the family, and discuss issues pertaining to the family. As part of the religious Vodun practiced in the area, gifts and sacrifices to the spirits and ancestors would also be given. However, during the reign of King Hawagbaja, 1645 through 1685, this widespread practice changed by making it so that sacrifices or gifts to spirits would have to be done by the king. King Agaja, 1718 to 1740, further centralized the ceremonies under the king and the royal dynasty. Under Agaja, the annual customs became the central religious ceremony in the kingdom. Wide participation by most of the population was required. In 1862, British explorer Richard Burton visited the Kingdom of Benin and described it in his accounts as a place of gratuitous barbarity which has fumes of blood and stinks of death. He went on to claim he was also physically repulsed by the Aho Ojiwu, as well as by the very streets of the city, in which green and mildewed skulls were lying about like pebbles. He admitted, however, that the people showed no emotion whatever concerning the unfortunate victims.